Have you ever wondered how Native Americans were able to sleep warm and dry when a snowstorm was raging outside the thin walls of their shelters? The indigenous peoples of North America, who lived on the Great Plains and in the forests of the Northeast, mastered this art to perfection. Their secret was not a single magic trick, but an ingenious, multi-layered system in which each element played a crucial role. They turned earth, branches, and processed skins into a highly effective sleeping technology. It was a whole science that allowed them to preserve precious heat and wake up rested even in the harshest frosts. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how the right combination of earthen beds, air pockets, and ventilation allowed them to sleep comfortably while the outside temperature dropped to extreme levels. What if I told you that everything you believed about life in a teepee was wrong? Most people imagine a teepee as a simple cone-shaped shelter, exposed to the elements. In fact, it was one of the most sophisticated and aerodynamically efficient residential structures in human history. Its conical shape was not accidental. It provided incredible stability in the hurricane-force winds of the Great Plains, forcing air currents to flow around the dwelling. The slightly sloped cone also played a key role in smoke removal. Smoke from the central hearth rose up to the opening without filling the living space. The secret lay in two smoke vent valves controlled by special poles. Residents could adjust their position depending on the direction of the wind. This created a constant and controllable draft, like in a modern chimney. This structure was not just a shelter, but a real climate control system. It allowed people to stay warm, dry, and breathe clean air. It was the pinnacle of engineering, refined over centuries. But what if I told you that the outer covering was only half the secret? Inside, there was another, equally important element. It was responsible for combating drafts and creating a comfortable microclimate. It was this inner layer that made the teepee truly warm. It blocked the cold air coming from the ground. We will talk about this element in one of the following chapters. Many believe that the hearth was the most important element, but this is not entirely true. The fire provided heat, but without proper insulation, it would have dissipated instantly. We can see that the teepee was a complex system, not just a tent. Each of its components was carefully thought out. Which element of this design do you think was the most ingenious? The shape, the smoke vents, or the inner liner? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about why the main enemy in the cold was not the blizzard, but the ground beneath your feet? During the winter months, frozen ground acts like a giant radiator, drawing heat from any object that comes into contact with it. Lying down on the ground meant losing all your body heat. This process is called thermal conductivity. Cold ground, with its enormous mass, has an almost infinite ability to absorb heat. It acts like a thermal black hole, relentlessly sucking energy from any warm body lying on it. That is why a person, even dressed in warm fur clothing, could freeze to death simply by falling asleep on the bare ground. The air around you can be heated or protected from the wind, but direct contact with a frozen surface means quick and certain death. Therefore, the first and foremost task was insulation. It was necessary to create a barrier between the body and the cold surface. This was a fundamental principle of survival known to all peoples, from the plains to the subarctic. The purpose of this insulation was not to create heat, but to preserve it. It was necessary to stop the process of heat transfer from the body to the ground. This required the use of materials that conduct heat very poorly. This principle was universal and discovered independently in different cultures. Peoples living in harsh climates learned this law of physics through harsh experience. Those who failed to master it simply did not survive the winter months. Any available dry and porous materials were used for this purpose. On the Great Plains, these were thick layers of dry grass or fragrant sage. In forest regions, dry leaves and moss were used. The most important property of these materials was their dryness. Any moisture in the insulation immediately froze, turning the life-saving bedding into an ice pack. Wet grass conducted heat almost as well as the ground, rendering it useless. In the plains where grass was abundant, it was gathered in armfuls and carefully dried. Fragrant sage was often added not only for its scent, it was believed that its strong aroma drove away evil spirits and in practice it was excellent at repelling insects and mice. In the dense forests of North America and Siberia, the best material was dry sphagnum moss. This moss has incredible absorbent and insulating properties. A thick layer of dry moss was almost as effective as modern foam. These materials created the first and most important layer. It had to be loose and fluffy to hold as much air as possible. It was the still air, not the grass itself, that served as the real insulator. The physics of this process is simple. Air is a very poor conductor of heat. Millions of tiny air pockets trapped between dry stems and leaves created a barrier. Body heat had to heat each pocket separately, which greatly slowed down heat loss. This layer of fluffy bedding had to be thick enough. If it was crushed, all the air would escape, and the insulating properties would disappear. Therefore, the task was not simply to throw grass on the ground, but to create a springy, lush cushion. More dense and durable materials were laid on top of this loose layer. These could be mats woven from reeds or cattails. They prevented the grass from being crushed and created a flat surface. Mats were an important household item. Weaving them was an art form practiced by women. They served as both a sheet and a spring base, protecting the soft insulation underneath. Such a woven mat evenly distributed the weight of the sleeper. This prevented the body from pressing down on the insulation in one place and coming into contact with the cold. It also protected against sharp branches or thorns that might be in the hay. This multi-layered bedding was the basis of any bed. It cut off the cold coming from below. Without this foundation, all other efforts to keep warm would have been in vain. You could cover yourself with the 3 warmest bison skins, but if you didn't have this insulating mattress under you, the ground would still take away the heat. Most of the effort to keep warm was directed downward, not upward. This principle is still relevant today for tourists and climbers. Modern sleeping bags provide almost no warmth on the side you lie on. All the insulation is compressed there, which is why a camping mat is needed. Inside a tipi or wigwam, sleeping places were located around the perimeter. They were never made in the very center near the hearth. This allowed people to avoid smoke and sparks. The center of the dwelling was the work area. That's where the fire burned, where food was cooked, and where there was the most smoke. Sleeping in the center was simply dangerous because of the risk of burns from flying coals. The sleeping areas along the walls, on the other hand, were the coziest part of the house. They were often additionally shielded from the central smoke by special screens or curtains made of animal skins. This created private and warmer sleeping niches. The thickness of this insulating layer could reach several tens of centimeters. The colder it was, the thicker the bedding was made. It was a simple but vital task. On normal nights, the layer could be as thick as a palm, but when the real frost came, it could be increased to half a meter. People literally sank into this dry, rustling bedding. This bedding had to be replaced regularly. It became crumpled and absorbed moisture from the bodies and dirt. Every few days, the old grass was taken out and fresh, dry grass was brought in. Creating such a base required time and knowledge of materials. It was necessary to collect and dry a sufficient amount of grass or leaves in advance. This was not a momentary task, but a seasonal one. Gathering materials for winter beds was as important a part of preparing for winter as harvesting crops or gathering firewood. Families spent entire days collecting the best grasses and moss in dry weather. Stocks of this dry stuffing were stored in special places protected from rain. Losing this stock due to dampness or fire was tantamount to disaster. Have you ever thought about how much time and effort went into the daily preparation of such seemingly simple beds? It was continuous work that ensured basic survival. People at that time could not simply buy a mattress. They created it every day with their own hands from what nature gave them, and their lives depended directly on the quality of this work. But even grass and mats were only the first step. In the next chapter, I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the peoples of the eastern forests, how they created the spring mattress of antiquity using what grew above their heads. What I am about to show you was forbidden to be used by outsiders in many tribes. I am talking about the technology of creating beds among the peoples of the eastern forests, such as the Iroquois or Algonquins. They brought the art of insulation from the ground to an incredible level using spruce or pine branches. This method was a real art, not just a pile of branches. First, several thick logs were laid on the ground. They served as a frame, raising the entire structure above the floor. Then the most important stage began, laying the spruce branches. The branches were not simply thrown into a pile, but laid in a special way, like tiles on a roof. Each subsequent layer overlapped the previous one, creating a dense and elastic covering. The branches were laid upside down, that is, with the cut end of the trunk facing down. This made the surface softer and more even. Thousands of tiny needles created millions of air pockets. The result was a thick, springy, and incredibly warm mattress. It was soft, comfortable, and completely insulated the sleeper from the cold ground. In addition, this bed gave off a pleasant pine scent. This mattress made of spruce branches was much more effective than simple grass. It did not settle as quickly and provided better air circulation. It was the ideal base for sleeping in a forest area. In the large longhouses of the Iroquois, the sleeping areas were even more sophisticated. They consisted of two-tiered wooden bunks built along the walls. The lower tier served as a bed and the upper tier as a shelf for storing things. A thick layer of pine branches was also laid on these wooden platforms. Then they were covered with mats and furs. It was a stationary, warm, and comfortable bed. This technology demonstrates a deep understanding of the laws of physics. The forest peoples intuitively used the main principle of thermal insulation, still air. Creating such a bed was a whole ritual. It required respect for the forest and precise knowledge of the properties of each tree. What if I showed you how one item served as a bed, a blanket, and a cloak? Once the bed base was ready, the next most important element came into play: fur and processed skins. They were responsible for retaining the heat generated by the body itself. For the peoples of the Great Plains, the processed skins of large herbivores played a key role. These heavy, thick pieces of fabric were a universal tool for combating the cold. They were used in several layers, each layer performing its own function. The first layer was laid directly on an insulating bed of grass or branches. The skins were placed fur side down. This created an additional air barrier and prevented the cold from seeping in from below. The sleeper lay down on this bedding. He could be dressed in his usual soft leather clothes. Sometimes special sleeping moccasins were worn for extra warmth. Then the person covered themselves from above. For this, they used one or more skins, but this time they were placed with the fur inside, against the body. The fur retained warm air, preventing it from escaping. The most valuable item was a large robe or cape made from such a skin. It served as outerwear during the day and a blanket at night. One such heavy cloak could replace several modern blankets. In forest regions, where there were fewer large plains, animals' deer skins were used. They were thinner, so more of them were needed. Several deer skins sewn together formed a warm and light blanket. There was also special clothing woven from strips of fur. This technology made it possible to create surprisingly warm and flexible blankets. The secret was in the multiple layers. One layer of fur, one layer of leather, then fur and leather again. Each layer created a new barrier against the cold air. How much time and effort do you think it took to carefully process just one heavy hide to make it soft and suitable for sleeping? But even the warmest furs would be useless if the icy wind penetrated the teepee. In the next chapter, we will finally reveal the secret of the inner lining that made the tipi a real fortress of warmth. Now let's return to the design of the teepee and its inner secret. This element was called ozan by the Lakota, or simply inner lining. It was a wide strip of treated leather or thick fabric that was attached to the poles around the inner perimeter. This liner started at a height of about 1.5 to 2 meters. It descended, stopping a few centimeters above the floor. This detail, simple at first glance, performed 3 critically important functions at once. First, it was the main protection against drafts. The outer covering of the tipi was not completely airtight, especially at the bottom. The inner liner completely blocked cold air, preventing it from entering the living area. Second, it provided insulation. An air pocket formed between the ozon and the outer covering. This layer of still air, like in a modern double-glazed window, significantly reduced heat loss. Thirdly, it was responsible for proper air circulation and smoke removal. Cold outside air, penetrating under the edge of the outer covering, entered this gap. There, it was heated by the hearth and rushed upward toward the smoke hole. This process created a powerful and constant draft. Like a pump, it pulled smoke out of the tipi, preventing it from sinking down. The living space remained clean, and sleeping people breathed fresh air. The ozone also protected against moisture. Any condensation or melting snow on the roof flowed down the outside of the insert, rather than dripping onto the sleeping people. The sleeping areas were located along this inner liner. People were reliably protected from any cold air movement. This allowed them to sleep in comfort, even when a blizzard was raging outside. This element demonstrates how deeply indigenous peoples understood thermodynamics. They used the natural movement of warm and cold air. Without the ozone, the teepee would have been just a cone of skins. It was this liner that turned it into a warm and cozy dwelling. Are you ready to learn the truth about how hundreds of people could sleep warmly in one giant house? Let's travel to the northeast, to the lands of the Iroquois. Their main dwelling was the longhouse, a huge structure made of wood and bark that could accommodate dozens of families. The secret to keeping warm here was completely different from that of the mobile teepee of the plains nomads. Instead of concentrating heat from a single fire in a small space, the Iroquois used the principle of thermal mass and collective living. Their houses were stationary fortresses designed to last for decades. The key factor was the collective use of resources. Up to 20 families lived in one such building, which could be up to 60 meters long. They all belonged to the same clan on their mother's side, which meant that the efforts to heat, cook, and gather firewood were shared. The construction itself helped to conserve heat. The walls were made of a sturdy frame of posts dug into the ground, which were then tightly covered with large layers of bark. This bark, most often from elm or ash trees, was removed in the spring, and when it dried, it served as an excellent natural insulator, trapping heat inside. The main source of heat was not a single stove, but a series of open hearths. These fires were located strictly in the center, forming a long line of fire along the entire length of the house. This central passageway was a common area, a real pulsating artery of life in the longhouse. Directly above each hearth, special smoke vents were left in the high-curved roof. These vents could be partially covered with large pieces of bark using long poles, regulating the draft depending on the weather. This ventilation system was far from ideal, and in winter, the houses were often filled with smoke. At the same time, the design was very efficient in terms of fuel economy. One hearth always heated two family compartments located opposite each other on either side of the passageway. This forced neighbors to constantly cooperate in maintaining the flame and consuming firewood. As we have already mentioned, the sleeping places were stationary. They were not just mats on the floor. They were wide wooden platforms, similar to modern bunks, which stretched in a continuous line along both long walls of the house. These platforms were usually built in 2, and sometimes even 3 levels. The lower tier was about half a meter or a meter above the earthen floor and served as the main living area. This is where people sat during the day, did crafts, and slept at night. The upper tier, located above, was often used for sleeping by young people and unmarried warriors. It also served as a giant shelf for storing supplies, utensils, and personal belongings. This was a very rational use of vertical space. It was a key engineering solution based on a precise understanding of physics. Raising people above the ground was a top priority. This immediately removed them from the area of the coldest and most humid air in the room. Cold air, which inevitably seeped through cracks at the base of the walls, always accumulates at the bottom. It is heavier than warm air and spreads across the earthen floor. Sleeping at this level would mean constantly feeling cold. By raising the beds just half a meter, the Iroquois removed the sleepers from this coldest zone. Warm air from the central hearths rose and circulated through the upper levels. It was much warmer on the bunks than on the floor. The space under the lower bunks was never empty. It was used very rationally to store impressive supplies of dry firewood for the winter. These neat wood piles were always at hand and did not take up living space. Moreover, this thick layer of dry wood itself provided additional massive insulation. It acted as another barrier, blocking the cold coming from the frozen ground. It was a double advantage. Each family compartment was separated from the others by partitions. The longhouse was not just a giant communal barracks. The space was clearly structured, and each family had its own apartment. A family occupied its own compartment, or cabin, located opposite its neighbor across the central passageway. These compartments were separated from each other by light partitions. Most often, these were large woven mats made of reeds or corn leaves. Sometimes treated deer or moose skins were used for this purpose. These simple dividers, while not providing complete privacy or sound insulation, were extremely important for warmth. They created makeshift rooms that captured and retained radiant heat from the nearest hearth. The large number of people living in one space also generated a significant amount of heat. This human factor should not be underestimated. Each adult at rest emits heat comparable to a 100-watt light bulb. When 100 or even 150 people were in one building at the same time, this collective heating effect became very noticeable. The heat from many bodies mixed with the heat from a dozen fireplaces. All this heat was constantly accumulated inside the massive structure. The wooden frame and thick bark walls did not cool down as quickly as the stone in European castles. They absorbed this collective heat and slowly gave it back. The longhouse essentially functioned as a giant living thermos. Of course, the temperature in the longhouse was not uniform. There was a clear gradient from the hot center to the cold walls. Near the central passage, close to the fire, it could be very hot and unbearably smoky. In contrast, there was a noticeable chill near the outer walls, especially on the north windward side. People constantly moved around, looking for a comfortable area. In winter, no one wanted to sleep in the compartment near the entrance. But on the raised and well-insulated sleeping platforms, it was possible to sleep quite comfortably. The sleeping places were additionally covered with thick skins. Most often, these were bear or deer skins, which served as both a mattress and a blanket. This system was ideally suited to the long and harsh winters of the Great Lakes region. It allowed an entire village, an entire clan, to survive months of frost and deep snow. People lived in relative safety and comfort, surrounded by their relatives. However, this system had its price, and it was high. Maintaining a dozen hearths 24 hours a day required truly enormous reserves of firewood. Fuel harvesting was the main task for men throughout the year. This led to the rapid deforestation of the forests around large Iroquois settlements. When firewood had to be carried several kilometers through deep snow, it became unbearably difficult. This was one of the reasons why the village had to be moved to a new location every 15 to 20 years. Can you imagine the level of social organization and strict discipline that was necessary to maintain order in daily life in such a huge communal house? Dozens of families lived, slept, cooked, and raised children in one space. Managing shared hearths, distributing supplies, and simply maintaining silence required very strict rules. At the head of each such house was an elderly woman, a matrona, whose word and authority were law for all its inhabitants. But what did those who had neither a massive longhouse built to last for years, nor an ingenious mobile teepee, do? How did the hunters and gatherers of the subarctic, Alaska, and northern Canada survive in even more extreme conditions? In the next chapter, we will look at their temporary but remarkably effective shelters. In the far north, in the subarctic zone, the Cree and Athabascan peoples often traveled in small groups. They did not build monumental dwellings like the Iroquois. Their ingenuity was evident in the creation of quick and extremely effective temporary shelters. This harsh land of forest tundra and taiga did not forgive mistakes and did not allow heavy structures to be carried. Survival here meant constantly moving in pursuit of game, such as moose or caribou. Therefore, their architecture was the architecture of a single day, light and quick to erect. They were true masters of improvisation, capable of creating warmth and comfort from literally nothing. To do this, they used only snow, fallen trees, and most importantly, fire. Their solutions were honed by thousands of years of living in one of the coldest climates on the planet. Their main ally was not so much blood as fire, but not just a fire that warms in all directions, but a well-thought-out system of long fire with a reflector. It was perhaps the most effective outdoor heating system ever invented by mankind. A regular bonfire, burning in all directions, would have been an unaffordable luxury given the scarcity of dry firewood. It would have wasted most of the precious fuel heating the surrounding frosty air and dark sky. A system was needed that would focus all the energy of the flame in one direction. The concept of a long fire was the ideal answer to this problem. It didn't just provide heat, it controlled that heat. It created a powerful, directed stream of radiant energy that could be captured and used to maximum benefit for those sleeping. First, a wind-protected location was chosen, such as near a low cliff, a fallen tree, or under dense fir trees. On one side, necessarily the windward side, a simple screen or canopy was built from branches and poles. Its purpose was not so much to provide warmth as to block the wind and protect from falling snow. Choosing a location was the first and perhaps most important step. Hunters instinctively looked for a natural windbreak that would serve as the back wall of their camp. A dense spruce forest was ideal, as its low, snow-covered branches already created an almost impenetrable wall. If there was no suitable natural shelter, it was built by hand. Several thick poles were stuck into the snow at an angle, and spruce branches were laid tightly on top of them, like tiles. This simple structure reliably blocked the icy draft that could negate all the benefits of the fire. The most important thing happened in front of this canopy. Parallel to it, at a distance of 1.5 to 2 meters, a long row of thick logs was laid out. Behind this row, that is, between the logs and the canopy, a large and hot fire was lit, which burned along the entire length of the logs. This was not just a pile of wood, but a carefully thought-out bonfire design. The hunter found several thick, dry logs, preferably of the same diameter. They were stacked on top of each other to form a low but massive wall screen parallel to the canopy. The fire itself was not round as we are used to. It was stretched out in a long line along the entire length of the future sleeping area. This was necessary so that the sleeping people would be heated evenly from head to toe, and not just on their sides. Such a fire required special wood that could burn long and hot. First, small twigs and birch bark were laid down for kindling. Then thicker logs were placed on top, which were supposed to maintain a stable flame for many hours. This log, or series of logs, served as a reflector. It prevented the heat from dissipating in vain in the opposite direction from the camp. The heat from the fire was reflected off this improvised log wall and directed precisely at those sleeping under the canopy. The log reflector, often called a nodia, was the heart of the entire system. It quickly heated up from the fire and began to radiate powerful infrared heat itself. This heat, like from an open oven, blew toward the canopy, creating a warm zone. In this way, the precious energy of the fire did not escape into the forest. It was trapped in the space between the fire and the canopy. The hunters got a double effect: direct heat from the flames and reflected heat from the massive log wall. Often wetter or even frozen logs were used specifically for the reflector. They did not burn quickly, but slowly charred on only one side, the side facing the fire. This allowed the reflector to work steadily throughout the night without needing to be replaced. The sleeping area was also prepared with special care. The ground or snow was never left bare. The surface was always covered with a very thick layer of spruce branches. No one ever lay directly on the snow or frozen ground, as this would have been suicide. First, the snow at the sleeping place was carefully trampled down. Then they began to methodically create a thick insulating mattress from materials at hand. Fir branches were the ideal material for this purpose. Their elastic branches created a thick, springy layer filled with air. It was this layer of immobile air that served as an insulator, cutting off the icy cold coming from the ground. The layer of branches was made very thick, sometimes up to 1/2 meter. It was laid out like tiles, starting at the head of the bed so that the soft tips of the branches faced upward. Deer or moose skins were laid on top of the branches with the fur facing upward, creating a dry and warm bed. As a result, the person was sandwiched between two sources of heat. Behind them, a canopy protected their back from the wind. Below, a thick mattress of branches and skins insulated their body from the frozen ground. And in front, on the open side of the canopy, a constant stream of heat warmed their face and body. This heat came from both the fire itself and the hot log wall. It was a real thermal sandwich in the open air. Sleepers lay down on this bedding with their feet toward the fire. This position was considered the safest and most effective. It allowed them to warm their feet and shins, which had frozen during the day, without exposing their faces and hair to the risk of catching fire from sparks. This system allowed one to sleep in relative comfort, even in the most severe frost. It was completely mobile and required nothing more than an axe and fire-making skills. It was the embodiment of living at the expense of the forest. An experienced hunter could build such a complete warm shelter on his own in just an hour and a half. This was critically important when a blizzard caught you on the road, far from the main camp. There was no need to carry anything but an axe and a flint. The forest provided all the necessary materials in unlimited quantities. Dry trees were used for firewood and reflector logs. Poles were used for the frame of the canopy, and spruce branches served as both a roof and a bed. The entire system was designed not to heat the air, but to concentrate radiant heat in one spot. It was an active heating system that required a constant supply of fuel. It was radically different from the passive insulation of a tipi or igloo. Unlike the tipi, which retained heat inside due to its shape, the long fire generated a heat zone in the open air. It did not heat a closed volume of air. It created a powerful stream of infrared radiation directed precisely at the person. The secret was in the correct distance between the fire and the sleepers. Too close to the fire, and you could get burned or set your skins on fire. Too far away, and the precious heat would not reach you, dissipating in the frosty air. Hunters determined this distance empirically, literally by stretching out their arms. The ideal distance allowed the heat to be strong but tolerable. A mistake of just half a meter could mean either burned clothes or a painful night in the cold. This method showed how fire itself could be used as a wall. The heat flow was so dense and constant that it created an invisible but tangible barrier against the cold. It was true survival engineering. We have looked at different shelters and beds, but they are all based on one common principle. The secret method of the Native Americans is not about materials, but physics. It is the science of using air pockets. It is still air that is the best insulator. All the techniques described were aimed at creating and retaining as many of these air pockets as possible. Let's see how it worked at each level. Let's start with a mattress made of spruce branches. Thousands of needles and small twigs created an elastic structure. It prevented the layers from collapsing under the weight of the body, keeping air pockets inside. The dry grass bedding did the same thing. Its loose structure was filled with air. The woven mat on top prevented it from being compressed. Now let's look at clothing and bedding. Treated skins were so effective because of their fur. Each hair of the fur trapped air at its surface. When a person covered themselves with a fur skin, they enclosed themselves in a cocoon of warm air. Their body heat warmed this air, and the dense layer of skin prevented it from escaping. Layered clothing worked on the same principle. Air was trapped between the layers. That is why several light layers of clothing keep you warmer than one thick layer. And finally, the very design of the dwelling. The inner lining of the tipi created a large air pocket between the walls. This air served as a buffer, slowing down heat loss. Thus, the entire sleeping system was based on the creation of layers. A layer of branches, a layer of mats, a layer of skins, a layer of clothing, a layer of air in the walls. This was a deep, practical understanding of how heat moves. Indigenous peoples learned not to fight the cold, but to manage it. Warmth was only half the battle. Staying dry was just as important. Wet clothes or bedding in the cold is a sure way to lose heat quickly. The threat of moisture came from two sides, outside and inside. Outside, it was snow. The design of the teepee, with its steep slopes, prevented snow from accumulating. In a longhouse or wigwam, the roofs were also sloped. Any melting snow ran off the bark without getting inside. Much more insidious was the moisture coming from inside. This was steam from people's breath, from cooking, and most importantly, from melting snow that had been brought inside. Ventilation played a key role here. In a tipi, the smoke hole and the gap under the ozone created constant circulation. They drew moist air out, replacing it with fresh, dry air. In a longhouse, smoke holes in the roof served this purpose. Raised sleeping platforms were also important. They kept people in beds away from meltwater that could accumulate on the earthen floor. Great importance was attached to personal equipment. Before going to bed, it was necessary to dry wet clothes and moccasins. They were hung near the hearth on special dryers. It was unacceptable to go to bed in wet clothes. It was also important to keep the insulating materials of the bed dry. Wet grass or damp branches did not provide warmth. On the contrary, they took away heat. Periodically, the entire bedding made of grass or spruce branches had to be changed. The old, damp, and matted bedding was thrown away. Fresh, dry material was laid in its place. It was a constant job to maintain dry conditions. Only in a dry shelter and a dry bed could one count on a good night's sleep. So, let's put all the pieces together. The secret sleeping method of Native Americans is not a single technique, but a comprehensive, multi-step system. It required knowledge, preparation, and discipline. The first step was proper shelter. Whether it was an aerodynamic tipi, a massive longhouse, or a temporary shelter with a reflector, each dwelling was perfectly adapted to its environment. The second step was the correct location of the sleeping area. It was always in the warmest and most protected part of the dwelling, near the ozone insert in the tipi or on a raised platform in the longhouse. The third step was insulation from the ground. This was an unbreakable rule. A thick, springy mattress made of dry grass or coniferous branches blocked the cold coming from the frozen ground. The fourth step was bedding. Multiple layers of treated skins were used. One layer was placed first side down for insulation, and another first side up towards the body to retain heat. Step 5, ventilation. The design of the dwelling ensured a constant flow of fresh air. Smoke and moisture were effectively removed, making sleep healthy. Step 6, moisture management. Constant drying of clothing and bedding. Keeping dry was as important as keeping warm. Step 7, personal preparation. Sleepers did not go to bed in wet or outdoor clothing. They used dry bedding. This whole system together produced amazing results. It allowed people not just to survive, but to live and rest comfortably. They slept warm and dry while the wind howled and snow fell outside. It was a triumph of human ingenuity and a deep understanding of nature. We can see that behind a seemingly simple activity, sleeping at night, there was a whole science. The peoples of North America did not have modern insulation or heating systems, but they used what nature gave them with unsurpassed wisdom and efficiency. From the aerodynamics of the tipi to the physics of air pockets and spruce branches, every element was in its place. This system, honed over millennia, allowed them to withstand the harshest winters. It proves that a deep understanding of the world around us is sometimes more important than complex technology. What other aspects of indigenous peoples' lifestyles or technologies would you like to see in future videos? Perhaps you are interested in food preservation methods or ways of getting around in winter? Suggest your topics in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into forgotten practices and ancient knowledge.